Popular question between athletes and anyone who thinks they know anything about exercise is what happens to lactic acid, or is lactic acid the reason we stop exercising? Is it the reason we feel a burn in our legs and whatnot? Now, people who don't know shit about exercise think they know everything. They're like, oh, it's lactic acid. That's all they say. They think that justifies everything. But now we're actually going to see what lactic acid really does in the body. Now, we know the process of going from glucose. Seems I write this a lot. Glucose to pyruvate, which is a glycolysis, and then it goes to lactic acid if the intensity is high enough or great enough. And that this process is anaerobic respiration. And the reason we're really forming the lactic acid is to regenerate that NADH, or that NAD from the NADH, so you can keep this cycle running and you can form another 2 ATP, etc., form more pyruvate. That's really why you make lactic acid. But the question is, what happens to this lactic acid? What is it? Well, lactic acid is essentially a waste product in our body, and our body sees lactic acid and it wants to actually it's lactic first, and it wants to get rid of lactic acid. So what it does is it converts it to some other chemical that you don't need to know, and your body has a buffer system that we talked about in the third exam about the lactic acid threshold, where your body can actually oxidize lactic acid up to a certain extent. So your body can oxidize lactic acid. Oxidize. And what this means is break lactic acid into water and carbon dioxide. So can oxidize it, which breaks it into water and carbon dioxide. And now obviously water and carbon dioxide are not bad for the body. They're normal. Water is normal in the body, so is carbon dioxide. You exhale it, and you exhale carbon dioxide. But so your body has a certain threshold where it oxidizes lactic acid. And this is a lactic acid threshold, which we don't dwell on too much. But your body can oxidize certain lactic acid. But beyond this level, this is when lactic acid builds up and becomes, and what its name is lactic acid, it's acidic, and it builds up the acidity in the body. If you build up acidity, we'll go over some brief chemistry. If you build up acidity, that means you raise the hydrogen ion concentration, which means you lower the pH. So lowering the pH in the body increases the acidity, and lactic acid does that. And when you increase the acidity or lower the pH, that fucks up the muscle because the muscle doesn't like acidity. So the muscle stops contracting, other things happen in the body and whatnot. So you don't want to increase the acidity. Now say your lactic threshold, say, is 5. So this is just a number I'm making up. But say you can, that's really what's the unit is, 5 millimoles. That means you can oxidize 5 lactic acids a minute. But say you produce 10 lactic acids a minute. Well, you can't oxidize as much as you're producing, so eventually that lactic acid builds up. It increases the acidity, and when this happens, that's when you get problems in the muscle. This isn't what stops exercise. That gets more confusing. The brain stops exercise ultimately, but it doesn't help. It increases the acidity. It damages the muscles if the acidity increases high enough. But so lactic acid is oxidized. Now another thing that can happen with lactic acid, the main thing is lactic acid gets oxidized, but lactic acid can also go through a cycle called the Quarry Cycle. And when you stop exercising, you have all this lactic acid in your bloodstream that you did not oxidize, all that extra lactic acid from the activity, which is mostly a high intensity, will generate much more lactic acid faster. Now in order to get rid of this lactic acid, it goes through something called the Quarry Cycle, which is essentially the lactic acid, so in your muscle, it goes through the liver. Everything happens to the liver, and in the liver, it actually becomes, well, first it becomes pyruvate, and then that pyruvate becomes glucose. So the body is very versatile. Remember, it doesn't waste anything. It sees lactic acid, so it's like, oh, I can make energy from that. So it brings the lactic acid into the liver, forms pyruvate, and then it forms glucose. That's called the Quarry Cycle. That's what happens to some lactic acid. Most gets oxidized, but a lot does go into the Quarry Cycle. Actually, a significant amount goes into the Quarry Cycle, but you also oxidize a lot. Now, you'll see something called passive recovery and active recovery. This is a very simple definition. She might ask, what is the difference between these? What do they do physiologically in the body? Well, everyone already knows these. They may not know by the name, but say you go out for any cyclists, triathletes, or runners or whatever, or really anyone who exercises besides weightlifting. Say you go out and you run a mile as fast as possible, or you go out and you run a workout, you run 9 mile workout, whatever. You just ran a workout. Well, after you work out, you know your body. You know they always say that it's better to be moving and actively be moving than it is just the work your ass off and then just lay down and pass out. You don't want to do that. Okay, so the reason why is because if you stop exercising abruptly, you just completed this intense bout of exercising, you just stop exercising. You sit, you lay down, you go on the couch, whatever. That's called passive recovery, not moving after you exercise, abruptly stopping and not moving. Passive means not acting, no action, you're just sitting there. So passive recovery means you just exercise, you just ran, whatever. You got all this lactic acid, you got all this acidity, your heart's beating like crazy, and you're just standing still. Anyone that you don't have to know shit about physiology, you know that's uncomfortable, you know that's not right if you're just standing still and your heart's beating like crazy and you're whatever, and you're breathing and whatnot, like you're panting and just standing still. Standing still is called passive recovery. That's bad. You don't want to do that. Active recovery will be jogging. So like you just finished exercise and your heart is racing, you have all this lactic acid, you're panting. And active recovery would just be like jogging around very, very slow, like jogging at 12-minute pace, which means a mile in 12 minutes, which is extremely slow for an athlete. So just jogging in place, or mostly just jogging in place, doing slow cycling, walking on the treadmill after you just ran. All of these are active recovery. Now the point of this is that one doesn't just, you can tell it just feels good. So obviously if something feels good, you're going to do more of it. But active recovery, the reason is because it recycles, one thing it does is it recycles lactic acid. Because you have all this lactic acid, it's really not just lactic acid, it's waste products. So you have all this waste products, which are carbon dioxide, lactic acid, nitric oxide, bicarbonate, all this stuff in your blood that you just byproducts of exercise, and you want to get rid of them. Now, in order to get rid of them, your body has to increase the blood flow and cycle them to the liver. Well, in order to do that, you have to be moving, because if you're moving, you're increasing your blood flow, you have more blood going to the liver. If more blood's going to the liver, that means more of this waste products, more of this shit is going to the liver, so you can metabolize it, form glucose, oxidize it, whatever the hell you want to do with it. So the point of active recovery is to increase your blood flow. If you increase your blood flow, you increase the flow of lactic acid and also waste and whatnot to the liver. And when that happens, you increase the Quarry cycle, and thus you form lactic acid to pyruvate. Pyruvate goes to glucose. So that's the point of active recovery. And that's also what happens to lactic acid. And when we talk about other things, when we talk about like the oxygen deficiency and oxygen debt, you can see what is happening to lactic acid. What are you probably doing during these different phases, because you know what happens with lactic acid now. Now, so next time someone says some random shit about lactic acid, saying, oh, it's all lactic acid, that's what makes them stop exercise, and you're like, no, you're stupid. Lactic acid is actually being recycled to the liver and forming glucose. You're stupid.